I'm going to remake my last published video really quickly, or as quickly as I can, with hopefully less noise, air traffic noise overhead. So I've stepped inside, and I'm going to be addressing a comment that was left on this video that I published, the title of which is, "This is just going to get you spanked harder, honey." And I published it around roughly a day ago. And the comment I'm specifically going to address is this one, left by a Melly Germany 9479. She has been bothering me on my YouTube channel, writing very long, drawn-out, extensive comments, and I've been recently making several videos debating her and refuting the things that she's saying, and basically implying that she's acting like an idiot. So I'm not going to bother with the first two sentences of this comment. I think that the topic of that is silly. I'm just going to move right along and begin at the third sentence. I've already addressed the topic of the first two sentences anyway. So again, I'm starting the third sentence down, and I will begin reading. So she says, "And no, I am not a member of the network of people or cult you discovered, or any other cult. It's insane that I would actually have to say this. It's just so preposterous." I do not accept that answer. That is not an adequate answer. I refuse to accept this answer from you. So for those of you who might be wondering why she's saying this, I have accused her. It's, first of all, so it's not insane. It's not preposterous at all that you should have to make this statement. All right. I gave perfectly adequate reasons why I suspect that you are a member of this group or network or cult of people that I believe engages in child trafficking, child abuse, and incest. One of those reasons being that I began publishing videos on this YouTube channel and writing in a WordPress blog about this network of people roughly 2 years ago. And very shortly after I began releasing videos on this YouTube channel about this cult of people who engage in child abuse, ritualized child abuse, you began popping up on my YouTube channel and leaving all these comments. And quite often they're very long, involved comments. Some of them are 2 or 3 times the length of this one. They are several paragraphs long, and quite often, almost all of them are aimed at picking me apart, attempting to make me seem unintelligent, likely trying to sabotage me in the public eye. So, and that's just one of the reasons. I've given more than that as reason why I suspect that you may very well be a part of this cult. And they engage in gang stalking and cyberbullying and harassing people online. And I do think that's what they've been doing to me in response to my speaking about them and writing about them online on social media platforms. So it is not at all insane or preposterous for me to insist that you give me a truthful answer as to whether or not you are in any way associated with these people. Now, why do I not accept this answer of yours? Why is it not adequate? For a few reasons. The first reason being that this is not a grammatically correct statement. So I insist that your response to that specific accusation or question of mine, I would insist that it be grammatically correct. I can understand how you may be from Germany or living in Germany, and English might not be your first language, but we have plenty of online websites, platforms, software that you can utilize to double check the grammatical accurateness of your statements. So even if you don't do that for all of your comments, I would insist that for this specific response, I insist that it be grammatically correct and that all of the words be spelled properly and appropriately. Why do I insist on that? I've already spoken in previous videos about how, particularly I get into this topic with the video that I released back in roughly right around January of 2023. It might have been at the very end of December 2022, or it might have been at the very beginning, maybe the first week of February 2023, but somewhere in that time span between the last week of December 2022 and the first week of February 2023, I release one or two videos about a guy named Dr. Shmuel Asher, who pushes flat earth theory. And I point out how very specific examples about how he uses tricky wording to deceive people. And so I do think that this cult of people that abuses children, I think that they are quote unquote devil worshipers. I think that they worship an entity that, to use Christian vernacular, could be known as the devil. And he is also known as the trickster. And by extension, these people, I do think, like to be tricky. They like to be tricksters. And one of the ways that they go about that is they take advantage of loopholes in questions that are asked of them to not tell the whole truth. They will build loopholes into their responses, and so that they don't have to tell the whole truth. I call it lying by telling the truth. They use very tricky wording so that they're technically telling the truth, but they're not exactly being entirely truthful. So how would that work here in this statement that you just left? Again, I'll read the statement again. And no, I am not a member of the network of people or cult you discovered, or any other cult. Well, first of all, I don't know in this statement that you are referring to the specific cult or network or group of people that I have been referring to. There are many, many groups of people and networks and cults out there. And the one that I've been speaking about on this YouTube channel is not the only one I've ever discovered. People discover networks and groups and what could be considered cults all the time. If you consider discovery to be something that it can be a personal thing. So we discover stuff all the time. We learn something new. It can be considered sort of a personal discovery. And I will give you the example of, let's say, Bitcoin. So for those of you out there who don't know, Bitcoin is a digital currency. It has a whole community of people who use Bitcoin to barter with and make transactions. There is a whole community of people online on YouTube. Go type Bitcoin into the YouTube search bar and you will be presented with just countless videos at this point of all kinds of different people talking about Bitcoin, advertising Bitcoin, so on and so forth. And those people who push Bitcoin and say that it's good for society, who transact with Bitcoin, they network with each other. So you can very easily say that the Bitcoin community is a network. They don't necessarily all engage in child abuse and child trafficking as a rule, or as like a ritual standard for being in that group. So I've used Bitcoin. I do not engage in ritualized child abuse or sexual child abuse. So there's a perfectly good example. But you could say that I am, in some ways, by virtue of the fact that I've used Bitcoin to pay for certain transactions, and I've spoken about Bitcoin, I'm speaking about it now, and I've spoken with people who've used Bitcoin, you could say that I'm a part of that network. I'm associated with that network, right? And I discovered it. I did not always know about Bitcoin. I learned about Bitcoin one day and then began using Bitcoin. And in that way, I discovered Bitcoin. I discovered a network of people. I discovered the Bitcoin network. I discovered the Bitcoin group. And many people have called the Bitcoin community a cult. So I discovered the Bitcoin cult. I am somewhat associated with the Bitcoin cult. So, and there are lots of things out there that could be considered cults. There are even work environments that operate on cult mentality. Technically, it could be considered a cult, right? But it's not officially, publicly, socially recognized as a cult. But it's still, it operates like a cult. There are a lot of circumstances out there, situations out there, that really, technically, they are cults. They operate as a cult, even if they are not officially recognized by the public as being a cult. So again, you could be referring to any network or group of people or cult that I've discovered. And it's a fair assumption to make that I would have discovered many networks and groups, and possibly even like cults, and some of them would qualify as cults in the past, and not just the specific one that I have been speaking of in these videos, right? So again, in that way, you could be giving me a truthful answer, but it's really, it's deflecting. It's not an adequate answer. It's not an adequate response to my questioning. So you could be lying by telling the truth there, because you're not being specific enough. You're not using adequate wording, and you're not using grammatically correct sentences. Your sentences are not structured properly. So I will insist that you give me a response that adheres to all of those requirements, or I refuse to accept it. I refuse to accept any response that is not grammatically correct, that does not have the proper spelling of all the words, and that does not have more specific wording. So I will ask you the question officially again. I've asked it in the past. I've implied it, so on and so forth. But here, I'm going to ask it again. Are you in any way associated with any individuals or groups of individuals or networks of individuals, or cults of, or any, in any way associated with, maybe you should just leave it as individuals or groups of individuals? Are you in any way associated with people like that who engage in child trafficking and or incest and or child abuse and or sexual child abuse and or ritualized child abuse? Are you in any way associated with any individuals or any groups of individuals that engage in ritualized child abuse, sexual child abuse, incest, or anything of that nature? So there's my official question, and I refuse to accept any responses from you that do not adequately meet the requirements I've just set forth. And I've given you, I think, reasonable reasons why I will not accept certain responses from you. It's the same way, guys, by the way, if you're dealing with cluster B personality disordered people, with malignant narcissists and psychopaths and sociopaths. They don't necessarily have to be part of a cult network that engages in child abuse. They just have to be highly narcissistic. I know I've had to deal with people like that they're just a narcissist. And so they do use loopholes in their words. They use tricky wording to not fully tell the truth. And so unfortunately you have to be aware of that and more discerning. And sometimes you have to be a bit of a pain in the butt and a bit nitpicky and insist upon more adequate and specific and detailed answers. Or else you could just be allowing someone to lie right to your face. All right, moving on with the rest of your comment. I never even heard about Zay Frank before you mentioned him. That does not matter because this is a network of people. This is an extensive network of people. I suspect that they have at the least a few 100,000, at the very least, at minimum. I suspect they have a few 100,000 members, if not more, if not ranging in the millions worldwide. So it would be ridiculous to think that every single member of this network, this group of people, would know or know of every other member. That would be ridiculous to think that. So, for example, there are, I think the last I read, there are roughly 6 million Freemasons worldwide. That's a secret society. That's a network of people, right? With secrets and rituals and secret little lodges and, you know, special little buildings that they go to where they have special secret little meetings, and they use symbols that most people don't understand what the symbols mean, so on and so forth. And supposedly they have secret knowledge that they pass down to each other. So that is a network of people. That's a group of people. There are an estimated 6 million of them worldwide, and it would be insane and preposterous to think that every single member of the Freemasons knows or knows of every other member of the Freemasons. I think it would be insane or preposterous to think that someone can know or know of 6 million other people. So it absolutely does not matter at all that you've never even heard of Zay Frank before I mentioned him. So moving on. As I already mentioned in my previous comments, this is not a debate about the significance and importance of the family, and that choosing a family is one of the most meaningful ways to live your life. I never disagreed with you on this. So I'm going to stop there and address this. So I'll reread this part real quick. As I already mentioned in my previous comments, this is not a debate about the significance and importance of the family, and that choosing a family is one of the most meaningful ways to live your life. I never disagreed with you on this. So it does not matter if you've never disagreed with me on that. You could, in fact, agree with me. So, but that does not mean you might agree with me that good motherhood is important, that having a healthy family unit is important, that making sure children grow up in a good, wholesome environment, that's healthier for them, that's healthier for society as a whole. You could, in fact, agree with me about all those things. That does not mean that you want those things. You might actually be averse to doing what's healthy for society and for children and for the family unit. And I will give the example here of Bane from Batman. I know he's a fictional character, but I think most people, I think this will reach the widest audience. I think most of my audience would have heard or would have seen Chris Nolan's Batman. He made 3 or 4 Batman movies with Christian Bale playing Batman. And in one of those movies, Batman goes up against one of his adversaries, a villain named Bane. And in the movie, Bane himself, his character says, "I am necessary evil." So Bane knows, he understands that he's evil. He admits it. He knows he's evil. He knows that what he's doing is evil. He knows that the actions he's engaging in, that they are evil. He knows that he could very likely be getting innocent people, like children, babies, mothers, puppies and kittens. He knows he could be getting them killed, slaughtered. But for whatever reason, he believes that it's necessary for him to do these evil things. He never says, he never states that it's bad to be a mother. He never he never says that it's unimportant to be a mother. He never says that it's unhealthy for parents to have all the resources they need to raise their children properly. He sort of concedes that, he understands. He's a very clear understanding between the difference between right and wrong, good and evil. He's simply chosen evil. He's chosen to do evil. And he has his own reasons for that, I guess. So, and even though he's a fictional character, out of 8 billion people in our we're up to about 8 billion people in our population now, right? Worldwide. There are certainly going to be at least a handful, I would say, again, maybe a network of people out there in our 8 billion population that have wholesale, that they have chosen evil. They know the difference between right and wrong. They know the difference between good and evil. They absolutely may very well agree that having a good, healthy family unit is what's best for raising children, and that by extension, that's the healthiest thing for all of our society. They absolutely could agree with that, but still be against it and still work against it because they have chosen evil for whatever their reasons are. They might have some kind of, some kind of belief system that makes them think that they should be evil. So if you are of any kind of a belief system that life is made up of hot and cold, wet and dry, good and bad, light and dark, then that could very easily lead to the determination that evil must be represented in the world and in life and within the human race. And that, again, then you might be basically joining the side of Bane and saying, well, I'm necessary evil. Yes, I know what I'm doing is evil, but I'm doing it anyway because I feel I must represent the side of evil, is what a good portion of the population out there, that's what they might be. That might be their opinion. That might be their belief. That might be what drives them in life to do what they do. So it doesn't matter that you never disagreed with me, honey. That doesn't mean that you're not evil. That doesn't mean that you're not attempting to have a witch hunt against me because I'm on the side of good motherhood, healthy family units, having adequate resources, all the resources we can get to raise our children properly, raising children and the future of our species in a healthy environment, giving them the best education possible, giving them the best nutrition possible, because this will have positive, healthy ripple effects on our species as a whole. I'm on that side. So, but you might very well be on the side that thinks that they need to represent evil, and therefore you want to undo healthy families. You might want to undo healthy family units. You might want to undo healthy mothers, healthy-minded mothers, empathetic women. You might want children to be abused and neglected and traumatized. You might want to spread trauma throughout the species and society. For whatever your reasons are, you might actually want those things. That does not mean that you disagree with me, that a good, healthy family unit and environment and a loving, empathetic mother and lots of resources is, what's best to raise children and raise healthy children. And that by extension, that would equal a healthier society. You understand? All right. So absolutely does not matter that you never disagreed with me on that. That does not mean you're a good person. That does not mean that you're stalking me. That doesn't mean that you're not stalking me for evil reasons. It doesn't mean you're not evil. It doesn't mean you're not a part of a devil worshipping cult network, right? There's another question. Are you in any way associated with people who worship any energy or entity that might be known to some as the devil? Maybe that's not the best way to word that, but she should know what I mean, and she should be taking my words with the meaning that is intended. But again, if you're dealing with cluster B personality disordered people, they're going to act like 4-year-olds. Basically, 4-year-olds are in their literal stages. It's called the literal stage, the literal phase, where they take every statement and every word quite literally, and they don't read the actual meaning into it. So as we get older, we get better and better at intuiting and understanding a person's meaning behind their words, even if they're not totally adequately wording their statements or questions appropriately. But because we're human beings and we have this connectedness, and because we're not total idiots and we have some empathy, again, as we get older, you can pretty well suss out what a person means. Usually, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, there will be occasional misunderstandings, but most of the time, even if a person does not adequately word their statements or their questions, you usually know what they mean anyway. And if you're just if you're not a crazy person or a narcissist or a cluster B or evil, then you will respond. You will take their words with the meaning that was intended and respond appropriately. But again, we're not dealing with typical people here. So, all right, moving on. We're almost done. My critique was about you and the statement you made in one of your videos. I have sent you part 1 of my response to you under your previous video. Yeah, I already addressed, in the last couple of videos that I released, I already addressed your critique of me and why that is also ridiculous. But I will really quickly touch upon that here. Again, is one of the things that she was critiquing about me, the debate was about me, was about the fact that I'm making a handful of absolute, broad, sweeping statements and some assumptions. Now, I did give some reasons, I believe adequate reasons, why I feel entitled does not seem like I feel confident in being able to make these statements and these assumptions. And that is, for one reason, I'm a 40-year-old woman. I am of above average intelligence. I have a very good education. I have 40 years of life experience with not just with myself, but interacting with other human beings. I've sat for long periods of time and or walked back and forth and thought about, the things like the meaning of life. I have a fairly good foundation, a fairly good understanding of human nature and what human beings need to feel fulfilled and satisfied. Like, for example, they need to feel like they have a purposeful life. They need to feel a sense of connection with other human beings. These are requirements. We do not do well in isolation, so on and so forth. So that's one of the reasons why I feel like I can confidently make at least a handful of assumptions and broad, sweeping, absolute statements. So in order to win the debate there, you would have to prove that, A, I don't have 40 years of life experience, that B, I am not of above average intelligence, that C, I do not have a good education. I have a better education than most. So good luck with trying to prove any of that, because that's simply not the case. I have a better education than most under my belt. I have above average intelligence. I was actually tested for it. I think the last time, I took a test back in my 20s, where I clocked out around the IQ, an IQ test that clocked me at like 164, something like that. And I just celebrated my 40th birthday at the beginning of October. So I do have 40 years of life experience, unless, my mom and my entire family have been lying to me my whole life about when I was born. So, yeah, I mean, human beings give broad sweeping, absolute statements all the time on their YouTube channels. They give opinionated assumptions, all the time. Why do you expect me to tiptoe around my opinions just so I won't irritate Melly Germany? I should just tiptoe around my opinions and make sure I'm very, very, very careful about how I word everything and just be very meek and meager about it. No. This is my YouTube channel, and I will give my opinion if I feel like it. And some of my opinions will be based on a lot of experience, a lot of good education, the fact that I'm not an idiot, common sense. So I'm every bit as qualified as anyone else to make at least a few absolute statements. I don't claim to know everything, but I have figured out at least one or two things, some ultimate answers to things. And so I do feel confident in making a few absolute statements. Now, when it comes to assumptions, I will point this out to you. You assume all the time. I assume all the time. Everybody. Here you go. If you want another absolute statement, everybody assumes all the time, pretty much every day, every single day, everybody makes at least one or two assumptions. Our entire society operates on the ability to assume a lot of things every day. If you sit down and think about it, you are making a lot of assumptions as you go through your day. If you're walking down the sidewalk and you pass someone on the sidewalk, you are making the assumption that they're not going to take out a penknife and start stabbing you in the neck until you're dead. They could do that. They absolutely could. But I'll bet you anything, that you have more than once in your lifetime gone walking down the street or walking down the sidewalk and passed someone walking next to you on the sidewalk, and you didn't flinch. You didn't put on body armor. You didn't search for a weapon to defend yourself. If you didn't just wholesale ignore the person, you might have even nodded at them, smiled at them, said hello. Right? Why wouldn't you assume that they could take out something and start stabbing you to death? Because there is that possibility. They absolutely are capable of doing that. So you're making that assumption. And if you didn't make that assumption, you would never go for a walk down the street with any other people around. Or at least if you ever saw somebody coming down the street at you, you would cross the street and maybe even pick up the pace and start running. You might do that in some circumstances, in some neighborhoods, with certain people that you see looking kind of shady. But again, I feel confident in making the statement that most people who are our age, who are at least, in their 20s, 30s, 40s or older, have at least a handful of times walked down the street, walked down the sidewalk, and passed a stranger that they didn't know anything about them, but they didn't take any kind of precautions as if they could be attacked, when that was a very real possibility. So they made a huge assumption there. They really put their lives on the line. People do this all the time, every day. You're making a huge assumption when you get into your car and assume that the brakes haven't been cut. When you go out driving on the streets and you assume that most of the people around you who are also driving will be abiding by the laws of the road. Now, again, there's always your outlier here and there. Once in a while, the person you walk past might be a deranged psychopath who's, or schizophrenic, and they think that you're the demon who's been talking to them, and they might try to attack you. Somebody who's driving nearby you might have a stroke and lose control of the wheel and drift into oncoming traffic or drift into your lane and There could be an accident. So I don't advocate for, totally letting your guard down. Be alert in at least some circumstances, somewhat alert. But still in all, you are making a lot of assumptions every single day. When you go to work, you assume that, if you put in your labor and time, your employer is going to then pay you with a currency that will then, you're assuming that currency will be accepted and good at places like the grocery stores that you can buy food for yourself. You're assuming it will be accepted by the landlord so that you can pay your rent. You're assuming that when you go outside and walk around in your lawn that an airplane isn't going to fall on your head. It's certainly a possibility, especially for myself right now. I mean, I live kind of right under sort of a flight path. There's actually an aeronautical school nearby, about a couple miles away. And so it might even actually be more likely, in my case, for that to happen than if living here than if I lived in other places, because a lot of the people, I'm pretty sure, going up in those planes and flying overhead are students. But at the same time, I'm going to assume that if anything goes wrong, there is almost certainly a teacher up there with them in case anything goes wrong. And it's reasonable for me to make that assumption because it would just be the responsible, safe thing to do. Because I'm not a total idiot, because I wasn't born yesterday, because I have empathy and a sense of responsibility, because I can kind of best guess and assume what other human beings would do in order to ensure that they are going about their day in a manner that is healthy, responsible, respectful of the lives and well-being of not just themselves, but others around them, so on and so forth. So it's reasonable for me to make that assumption. It might be more likely that that a plane could drop on my head while I'm outside on the front lawn because some of these planes are being flown by students. But then again, I should also be making the assumption that those students are probably being overseen by a teacher. In case anything goes wrong, the teacher could take over and, at least for the most part, safely land the plane without killing anybody. So human beings, people, you and I and everybody else, we all make assumptions all the time, every day. We're making maybe like 1,000 assumptions a day, if not more. Why are we able to do this? Because we're lucky enough to be born into a society that has structure, that has laws and rules, that has social standards, that has empathy and morals and ethics, and that there are consequences if you veer from these laws, rules, social standards, if you break them, right? And so because of that, because we have a certain amount of structure to the society we have built as a species, it affords us the ability to make assumptions, to go about our days making a hell of a lot of assumptions. And because we're able to do that, because we're not looking over our shoulder every 5 seconds to make sure, we're not going to get eaten by something, because we're not living like in the wilderness jungle where it's just every man for himself, survival of the fittest, because we don't live in those circumstances. We live in a structured society where we have manners. We have, you are allowed to have certain expectations of the world around you, of the people around you. Right? Because we live in those circumstances, we are able to be more progressive. We are able to be more productive. We can focus our time and energy and efforts on things like achieving, composing great works of music, painting beautiful paintings, building airplanes, designing and building airplanes, learning how to fly airplanes, bettering our technology as a species. We would not have gotten anywhere near where we are as a species in terms of our progress, our abilities, our technological our technological luxuries, so on and so forth. We wouldn't be anywhere near where we are right now if it weren't for our ability to make a hell of a lot of assumptions every single day, all the time. And we can thank, to no small degree, we can thank the way we've structured our society and our species. We can thank the laws and such for that. The morals, the ethics, empathy, and again, also our own nature. We have an abundance of empathy, or most of us have a great capacity for empathy, which has led to the laws, to us making laws, which leads to us bringing consequences, negative consequences for those who break the laws. It led to us coming up with things like human rights. Again, all of this stuff lends itself to us, it affords us the ability to make numerous assumptions. Again, probably maybe thousands of assumptions every single day. You assume a lot. So I don't know who the hell you think you are trying to claim that I shouldn't be making any assumptions, right? Wow, talk about being a hypocrite. I hate that saying. There's a saying out there, to assume something makes an ass out of you and me. I hate that saying because it's like, well, I guess everyone is an ass. Everybody assumes all the time. You're assuming all the time, Miss Melly Germany. Anyone listening to this or watching this is assuming all the time. You've already made several assumptions throughout your day before you ever found this video. All right? So don't ever use that phrase. It's a stupid phrase. It really should die off. It's it's one of the dumbest phrases I think our species has ever produced. An ass out of you and me. Because we all assume all the time, every day, and we should be thankful that we are able to assume. Right? Because the alternative to that is we are living survival of the fittest, looking over our shoulder every 5 seconds, worrying that something's about to eat us, worrying how we're going to stay warm, worrying how we're going to stay fed. Oh my gosh, is this berry poisonous or is it going to be nutritious? Well, we don't have to worry about that. Typically, again, there's always here and there you will have a little outlier, but the trend is you just go to the grocery store and those berries have already been vetted. All right, those berries, it's pretty much, it's basically it's guaranteed. The grocery store and the people who produce the berries will get into a lot of trouble if there's anything wrong with those berries and they're poisonous. So it's all but guaranteed that those berries are not going to poison you. They are healthy and nutritious for you to eat. You're kind of making that assumption though when you go there and buy some raspberries or blueberries and eat them. You just can't make that assumption when you're like living out in the wild and you have no structured form of society that you are living in. All right, have I made my point? You assume a lot. You assume a lot all the time. We all do. Goodbye. Stop judging me for making assumptions or broad sweeping statements. Lots of, I think everybody at least has once in a while, everybody during the course of their lives, if they lived for any substantial amount of time, assuming they've lived into their teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, or older, they have made at least a few broad sweeping absolute statements. And who the hell are you to say that I can't? And I would venture to say I'm probably more qualified than you to do so. Because so far, it does seem that you are just an idiot. At least you're behaving like one. You're still not holding up any kind of adequate debate on your end. You're just not doing it for me, Melly. I'm sorry. So, please do give me a response to the question that I asked earlier in this video. It needs to be it needs to be adequate. It needs to be grammatically correct and it needs to be more detailed. Goodbye.